Have you ever noticed, as you move through the strange currents of human life, that the people who appear the most harmless are often the ones who carry the deepest quiet within them? And in that quiet, sometimes something far more unsettling resides. We are taught to fear the loud ones, the angry ones, the ones who shout and rage like storms. But storms are honest. They reveal themselves immediately. The true danger, the kind that slips beneath the surface of awareness, comes not from thunder, but from silence. Because there exists a certain type of person who does not feel in the way you and I feel. Their emotional landscape is not a sea, but a desert, vast, still, and strangely empty, quiet, unmoving, unaffected. It is not their calm that is frightening, but the absence beneath it, a silence that does not soothe, but swallows. You know, we often imagine evil as something dramatic, a shadowy figure, a violent force, a creature snarling in the dark. But in reality, evil is rarely theatrical. It is quiet, subtle, terribly polite. It wears nice shoes and speaks with calm certainty. And that is precisely what makes it difficult to see. To understand what we call evil, one must look beneath the mask, not at the behavior itself, but at the psychology beneath it. For dangerous people are not merely acting out of malice, they are acting from deficits, profound absences in the human structure. If you wish to understand the first sign of a dangerous human being, you must begin with a rather curious absence, the absence of empathy. Not the polite, socially conditioned empathy we display at funerals or family gatherings, but the deep, resonant capacity to feel the inner world of another. Most people possess, at least to some degree, the strange gift of emotional resonance. When you hurt, something within them trembles. When you rejoice, something in them rises. It is an invisible thread that binds us together as one human tapestry. But there are those who do not possess this thread at all. They understand your pain only as an observer understands a distant storm. They can describe the clouds, but they cannot feel the rain. Now, this absence does not announce itself loudly. In fact, it often hides behind an unnerving calmness. During crises, when others shake or weep or fall into confusion, these individuals remain untouched, as if watching life through thick glass. And you may mistake this emotional neutrality for wisdom, composure, or strength of character. But it is not wisdom, it is distance. It is not composure, it is emptiness. For when someone cannot feel the suffering of others, they are free to do anything without the natural breaks that compassion provides. And a person without breaks may move through the world with extraordinary smoothness, yet leave devastation quietly behind them. And this, you see, is far more dangerous than anger, for the person who feels nothing has nothing to restrain them. No guilt to slow their hand, no empathy to redirect their intentions, no inner compass to soften their decision. They move through life untouched by the delicate threads that bind human beings together, and so they can sever those threads without hesitation. There is, within certain individuals, a curious silence where conscience ought to live. Most of us carry within our hearts a subtle tremor, that small inner bell which rings when we have stepped out of harmony with the world. It is the sensation of having disturbed the delicate fabric of relationship, the soft ache that asks us to return, to apologize, to realign ourselves with something greater than ego. But imagine a person for whom this bell never rings. Not because they are evil in some mythic sense, but simply because the mechanism is absent. There is no guilt, no remorse, no inner pause before causing harm. And so, they move through life without the gentle friction that shapes ordinary human behavior. Instead, they drift into a sort of moral disengagement, the capacity to justify anything, to rationalize everything, as though they themselves were the sole axis around which the universe turns. When this lack of conscience appears in daily life, it is often subtle at first. You may notice how they craft elegant explanations for actions that would trouble the heart of an ordinary person. They do not feel the sting of wrongdoing, and so they cannot understand why you do. And in this absence of inner resistance, one discovers a quiet, unnerving truth. A person who feels no guilt can reshape reality to suit their desires without ever noticing the cost to others. For conscience is not merely a list of rules or moral commandments handed down by society. It is rather the echo of empathy within oneself. It is the internal tug that whispers, "You have caused harm, you must make this right." But if one does not feel the tremor of another's suffering, then this echo never forms. There is no inner tug, no whisper, no hesitation. In such a person, guilt is not a natural response, it is only an inconvenience. Remorse is a performance, accountability is a foreign language. This is why they gaslight, not simply to confuse you, but because the idea that they could be wrong is intolerable to them. Without the gentle restraint of conscience, the boundary between relationship and utility begins to blur. Instead of discovering that people are living mysteries to be met with wonder, they learn that people are instruments, tools to secure safety, admiration, comfort, or control. And so they move through life not relating but utilizing. When you encounter such a person, you may notice a subtle tension, as though they are not truly with you but rather calculating around you. Their eyes do not seek your soul. They search for usefulness. Your feelings, your dreams, your vulnerabilities become variables in an equation they are attempting to solve for their own benefit. This is where charm enters the picture, not as a quality of the heart, but as a learned technique. Some individuals become remarkably skillful at reading emotional cues, not because they feel deeply, but because they have learned that understanding people's reactions grants them a certain power. What appears as emotional intelligence is, in truth, the strategic use of observation. They study human behavior the way one might study a map, noting which expressions soften others, which words open doors, which gestures inspire trust. This adaptive masking becomes their survival strategy, and over time it becomes their method of influence. Their charm is calculated, their warmth is deliberate, their attentiveness is structured, their timing is precise. You can see this in the way they enter a new relationship with extraordinary speed. They offer praise, intensity, certainty, not because they feel it, but because they know its effect. Then there is the mirroring, the uncanny ability to reflect your interests, your humor, even your worldview. It feels at first like profound resonance. At last, someone who understands. But what you are experiencing is not understanding, but imitation. A mask shaped precisely to fit your expectations. This is emotional intelligence without heart, a skillful performance of humanity that lacks the inner human core. And when the mask slips, as it always does, you discover that the charm was never affection, it was strategy. One of the most revealing qualities of such a person is not the occasional lie which all humans stumble into at times, but a kind of ease with dishonesty, as though truth were merely one option among many, rather than a principle that guides action. To them, a lie is not a moral event. It is simply a tool. And because they do not experience the internal friction of conscience, their relationship with truth becomes fluid, adjustable, almost casual. They do not lie to deceive in a theatrical sense. They lie because it is efficient. It solves a moment. It maintains an image. It avoids accountability. You can often detect this pattern not by the lie itself, but by the speed with which the story shifts. Details bend, timelines rearrange, a contradiction appears, and instead of pausing, instead of the natural discomfort most people feel, they simply create a new version of events to fill the gap. And beneath this fluid relationship with truth lies something even more revealing. Not an emotion, not a belief, but a drive. A behavioral gravity that pulls every one of their actions into the same orbit. There is another trait that separates ordinary difficult people from truly dangerous ones. An underlying, persistent need for control. Not control as dominance in the crude sense, but control as structure, the quiet compulsion to position themselves as the organizing principle of every interaction. With these individuals, control is not a preference. It is their psychological baseline. When a person lacks empathy and conscience, they require external management of their environment to compensate for their internal emptiness. And so they begin to shape the dynamics around them with unnerving subtlety, deciding what is discussed, what is ignored, what is interpreted, and what is denied. You will see it in how they test boundaries, early small interruptions, minor corrections, strategic withholding. These are not accidents. They are probes. They are measuring how easily your reality can be adjusted. A dangerous person cannot tolerate equality. Equality threatens their sense of authority. They function only when they are elevated emotionally, intellectually, or morally. And the moment you stop responding to their cues, they escalate, not with chaos, but with precision. One of the clearest examples of this quiet form of danger can be found in a man who never raised his voice, never appeared violent, and never looked like the embodiment of cruelty, Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was not the stereotype of evil. No rage, no spectacle, no dramatic presence. He was orderly, polite, efficient, the sort of man who gave the impression of a well-trained clerk or a disciplined administrator. And yet, behind that ordinary exterior was something far more unsettling, a near total absence of empathy and conscience. When questioned after the war, Eichmann didn't express hatred. He didn't express ideology. He barely expressed emotion at all. He simply described his role as one would describe a series of administrative tasks, paperwork, logistics, coordination. Human suffering was not denied, it was simply irrelevant. A detail, a footnote. The emotional meaning of the pain he facilitated never seemed to register. And that is what makes him such a crucial example. Eichmann did not commit atrocities because he was consumed by passion or driven by personal rage. He committed them because nothing inside him resisted. No empathy to interrupt the process. No conscience to create tension. No inner life deep enough to confront the consequences of his actions. Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil, the terrifying truth that great harm can be carried out not by monsters but by empty men who simply follow the path of least internal resistance. This is the kind of danger most people fail to recognize. Not the man who looks frightening, but the man who feels nothing. If we are to speak honestly about dangerous individuals, we must make a crucial distinction, one that prevents confusion and keeps us intellectually honest. Not every person who appears cold and silent is a threat, but a dangerous person behaves differently. A traumatized person may seem distant, but they do not study your reactions like data points. They do not adjust their facial expressions like tools. They do not weaponize ambiguity. A dangerous person does. The point is not to fear every quiet individual, but to recognize when silence is a signal rather than a symptom. Wisdom lies in noticing when detachment serves survival and when detachment serves control. After seeing the structure of a dangerous mind, when understanding alone is no longer enough, one must turn inward and recognize a simple truth. Your inner world is your only real possession. Everything else can be borrowed, traded, or taken, but your clarity that is yours to protect. Now, protection is often misunderstood. People think it means building walls or living in suspicion, but self-protection is far more subtle than that. It is simply the ability to step back from anything that disturbs the natural order of your mind. When a person's presence bends your sense of reality, pulls you into confusion, or invites you out of yourself, it is not noble to endure it. It is foolish. Wisdom is the art of maintaining inner balance in a world that constantly tries to pull you off center. And so, if you find that someone operates without empathy, without conscience, or without any sense of responsibility for the impact of their actions, the appropriate response is distance, not punishment, simply space, a quiet reclaiming of your own perspective. A person who feels nothing can take everything. Detach from anyone who is detached from your pain, your time, or your humanity. Protect the integrity of your heart, not out of fear, but out of respect. For some people see the heart not as a treasure to honor, but as a tool to use. When you place all these tendencies side by side, you begin to see that what we call evil is not a dramatic force at all, but a kind of psychological vacancy, an emptiness where awareness ought to live. It isn't darkness in the mythological sense, but a deficiency in the capacity to recognize oneself in others. This absence produces a very particular kind of human being, clever, persuasive, outwardly composed, yet hollow at the center. Not because they are plotting destruction, but because they lack the inner reference point that would prevent it. Once you understand this, the question is no longer how to judge such people, but how to stay awake around them. For danger arises not from their presence alone, but from the moment you allow their confusion to become your confusion. The wise response is remarkably simple. Step back into your own clarity. If a person cannot feel the consequences of their behavior, they are capable of almost anything not out of wickedness, but out of unconsciousness. And unconsciousness is far more dangerous than malice, because it does not recognize itself. In the end, the task is not to harden yourself, but to remain lucid, to see clearly what is in front of you, and to walk away when clarity demands it.